Saturday had its own smell, its own sound, with its own feeling that nothing else in the week could touch. It didn't announce itself loudly. Saturday never did. It arrived the way all truly good things arrive, quietly, while you were still half asleep, seeping in through the edges of consciousness before you had fully committed to being awake. There was no alarm, or if there was one, it had been set for later. A full hour later, sometimes more. And the difference between a school morning alarm and a Saturday morning was not merely an hour. It was a completely different quality of time. Weekday mornings had a direction, a pressure, a momentum pulling everything forward toward the school bus or the office door. Saturday morning had none of that. Saturday morning simply was. It existed without agenda, without destination, and in the particular silence of a house that had not yet been asked to do anything. You could feel it even before you opened your eyes. The ceiling looked different. The light through the curtains was softer, or arrived at a different angle, and your body knew, without consulting a clock, without any conscious thought, that today was Saturday, and that nothing was required of you yet. You lay there for a moment, just a moment, but it was one of the finest moments of the week. The sheets were warm. The pillow was in exactly the right position. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed softly. Your mother probably, who rose before everyone and whose footsteps you could track through the walls of a house you knew, as well as your own heartbeat. Then, a sound. A small, definitive domestic sound that came from the kitchen, and it was that sound, not an alarm, not a voice calling your name, that truly started the day. You haven't heard it in decades, perhaps, but you will, before this morning is through. There was also something else. A ritual observed every Saturday in nearly every house, on every block of every neighborhood in America. Something that nobody planned, and nobody declared, and nobody would have been able to explain if you'd asked them directly. And yet everyone in the family protected it with a quiet, unanimous instinct, as if breaking it would break something fragile and important. We'll get there. But first, the kitchen. Your feet hit the floor, and the linoleum was cool against the soles of your feet. This is important. The linoleum in the kitchen was always a few degrees cooler than the bedroom carpet. And in the morning, before the sun had properly warmed the house, it was a mild shock, pleasant, in the way that small physical contrasts are pleasant when your body is warm and rested. You padded down the hall without hurrying, hair uncombed, pajamas still fully wrinkled from sleep, and the smell reached you before you reached the kitchen. It came in layers, the way smells always come when several things are happening at once on a stove. The sharpest and highest note was the coffee. Not instant, not a machine, but the percolator. Already going, doing its slow and patient work on the counter, and beneath it, warmer and richer, the smell of bacon beginning, or sausage, or the particular sweet savory cloud that rose from a skillet with butter beginning to brown it. On some Saturdays there was something else, floating above all of it like a benediction. The faint sweet smell of pancake batter, something that required just a little more effort than a Tuesday morning warranted, which was precisely why it appeared on Saturday. Together, these smells made a thing that was more than the sum of its parts. They made Saturday. They made safety. They made the smell of a house in which no one had to be anywhere yet. Your mother was at the stove. She was wearing her housecoat, a cotton or quilted robe, belted loosely at the waist, in a floral print, or a solid color depending on the decade and the household. Soft-soled slippers on her feet, and she was standing at the range with a spatula in one hand, not rushing, not harried, not already composing her mental list of everything that needed to be done before noon. Saturday morning gave her something too, a slight loosening of the week's tension, and you could see it in the set of her shoulders, which were not forward and purposeful the way they were at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday, but back, easy, almost relaxed. She might have been humming. If the radio was on, and on many Saturdays it was, the small countertop radio with the round dial and the single speaker, set low enough to be background rather than foreground. She might have been humming along without quite knowing it, and the sound she made was part of the kitchen's total sound, and the way that the refrigerator hum was part of it, natural and continuous and deeply reassuring. Maybe your father was there too, at the table. Maybe he was already in his chair, the same chair he always occupied, the one that was, without any declaration, with his coffee cup in front of him, and the newspaper spread open, its sections separated and slightly disordered, the way a newspaper looks when it has been read by someone who reads slowly and with attention. He wore his weekend face, which was different from his weekday face, less arranged, somehow. The slight furrow that lived between his brows from Monday to Friday was absent, or at least fainter, and he might look up from the paper when you came in and say something easy. Not hurry up, or are you ready? But something with space around it. Something like morning or cold out there, or nothing at all. Just a look that said he saw you and was glad you were there. Maybe your father sat right there, coffee cup in hand, newspaper spread wide, and for a moment the whole of Saturday was contained in that image. His reading glasses, the steam from the cup, the black and gray of the newsprint, the comfortable silence between two people who did not need to fill it. What did Saturday morning breakfast mean in your house? Pancakes, French toast, or something you only got once a week? Because it was something. It was almost always something different from the rest of the week. The weekday breakfast was functional. Cereal poured from a box into a bowl, milk splashed in, a glass of orange juice that was sometimes fresh, and sometimes from the can of frozen concentrate that you mixed with 3 cans of cold water. A piece of toast if there was time, maybe not if there wasn't. It was eaten standing up, or eaten in 5 minutes, or half-eaten, and then left because the bus was coming. It was fuel. It was not a meal. Saturday breakfast was a meal. Saturday breakfast was a decision, a small act of intention, a thing your mother made because she had time to make it, and because the family was all together, and because without saying so, everyone understood that this was the one morning when the kitchen table was for sitting at, not merely for eating at and leaving. If it was pancakes, and in many houses, it was pancakes, or waffles, or the thick French toast that started the night before when the egg and milk mixture was assembled in a shallow bowl, and the bread was laid in, and everything was left in the refrigerator to soak. And in the morning it came out dense and custard soft and went into a buttered skillet and emerged golden on both sides. If it was any of these things, there was a ceremony to it that could not be replicated on a weekday. The griddle was brought out from its drawer or cabinet, which it occupied specifically for this purpose, because it was too large for ordinary use and too valuable to give up. It was set on 2 burners. Your mother tested the heat by flicking a few drops of water from her fingertip onto the surface, and waiting for the sizzle and the small explosive vanishing of each drop. When the drops danced and disappeared immediately, the griddle was ready, and the batter went down in slow circles. Never perfectly round, always with a tail or a slight elongation that gave each pancake a character. And the kitchen filled with a smell that was simply one of the best smells a domestic interior has ever produced. The butter melted into the first batch while they were still hot, soaking in at the edges and pooling in the small valleys of the cooked surface. The maple syrup, a glass bottle, or sometimes the one in the little tin container, shaped like a log cabin, the Aunt Jemima, or the log cabin brand, was either already warm because someone had set it in a bowl of hot water, or it was cold and thick and took a moment to pour. And the cold, thick syrup was, in its own way, exactly right, too. Your fork cut through the stack. The first bite was a thing that existed, for a moment, in a different category from ordinary eating. It was warm and sweet, and slightly salty from the butter, and it was Saturday, and it was yours. The percolator. Here's the sound that started the day. Not the alarm, not the voice. The percolator. If you grew up in a 1960s household, you knew this sound as well as you knew any sound in the house. It began quietly, a low bubble and knock. And then as the water heated, it found its rhythm. A steady, metronomic bubble, bubble, bubble. Each burst, sending a small jet of coffee upward into the glass knob on the lid, where you could watch the dark liquid pulse and clarify and deepen in color as the minutes passed. The sound filled the kitchen in the early morning before anyone had spoken. It was, in its way, a kind of companion, patient and rhythmic and reliable, not demanding anything of you, simply doing its work. By the time you reached the kitchen, the percolator had usually finished its cycle and sat on a low burner staying warm, and the smell of it was absolute. It was not the smooth, managed smell of a drip machine. It was a bolder smell, slightly roasted at the edges, with a depth that came from the repeated cycling of hot water through the grounds. It smelled like morning. It smelled like the decision to take the day seriously. Your father's cup was already half finished. Your mother's cup sat near the stove with the spoon still in it, because she hadn't had a moment to sit down yet and was drinking it in installments between flips of the pancake and adjustments to the bacon. Coffee was strong. Adults drank it with cream and sugar, usually, and the cream changed the color of it from dark to a warm café au lait brown. And the cup was heavy in the hand and warm all the way through. And this is one of the most reliable sensory memories in the entire repertoire of the 1960s morning. The weight of a full ceramic coffee cup and the heat of it passing through the glaze and into the palm. There was something every Saturday in your house, not declared, not planned, but real and consistent. A small ritual that everyone participated in without anyone calling it a ritual, that gave the morning its particular shape. Not the breakfast itself, though the breakfast was part of it. Not the newspaper. Not even the cartoons, though we will get there. It was something quieter, something that had to do with a specific kind of presence, a quality of attention that the family extended to each other only on Saturday, as if the permission given by the absence of weekday obligation opened something up in everyone and made them, briefly, completely, in the space of a single morning, more fully themselves. From the living room, the sound of the television, not just any television sound, a specific sound. The tinny, slightly compressed sound of a Saturday morning cartoon on a small screen, the exaggerated chase music of a Bugs Bunny cartoon, the heroic brass fanfare of a show about space, the clatter and honk of animated mayhem, mixed with the occasional burst of canned laughter, the quick sting of a commercial jingle, and beneath all of it, the particular hiss and crackle of a television set that had been switched on, while still slightly cold, its tubes warming up. If you were a child in the 1960s, and you woke before your parents, this sound was your first act of sovereignty. You went to the living room in your pajamas. You sat on the floor, usually directly on the floor, cross-legged, close to the screen the way that all adults warned you not to be, but that no child could resist, and you turned the dial to the right channel, and the picture came on. And for the next hour or two you existed in a world that required nothing of you except your full, delighted attention. Do you remember which cartoon you never missed, and where you sat while you watched it? Because there was one. There's always one. For some, it was Bugs Bunny. and the whole catalog of Warner Bros. Daffy Duck's stutter and his barely contained fury at the world's indifference. Elmer Fudd's eternal misdirected grievance, the Roadrunner's elegant disregard for physics. For others, it was the Flintstones, which aired on Saturday mornings in reruns after its primetime run, and which managed the double trick of being funny to children and oddly plausible to adults, with its Stone Age suburban life that was recognizably, cheerfully, their own suburban life in ancient drag. The Jetsons ran in some markets, with its optimistic cartoon future of flying cars and robot maids, and a world in which technology solved every problem, a future that, in 1965, seemed not only possible but imminent, and which children watched with the particular excitement of people who expected to live in it. Rocky and Bullwinkle, with its two-layered jokes, the obvious slapstick for the children, and the dry political satire that sailed over their heads and landed squarely in the laps of the parents, who wandered through the living room on Saturday mornings and paused, Ed, involuntarily to watch. Casper the Friendly Ghost, gentle and lonely. And by the late 1960s, Scooby-Doo, which arrived like a small cultural event, instantly familiar and completely its own thing, its mystery format generating the same satisfying repetition of the fairy tale. The monster, the chase, the revelation, the unmasking, week after week, without any diminishment of pleasure. The cartoon theme songs. You probably haven't heard some of them in 40 years, but some part of you still knows every word. The opening of the Flintstones. That propulsive, almost proto-rock and roll theme is still there, isn't it? In the part of your memory that stores music before language, complete and intact. The whistle of the Jetsons theme. The piano figure of Rocky and Bullwinkle. These are not nostalgic additions. They are actual neurological facts. The brain stores the music of early childhood with a fidelity it rarely extends to later experiences. And the Saturday morning cartoon theme song sits in there, perfectly preserved, like a photograph in a sealed album. Your mother, at the stove, could hear the cartoon from the kitchen. She had heard the same theme songs every Saturday for years. She probably could have named most of them without looking. She may have found them annoying in the abstract. She never said so. The cartoons were the children's half of the Saturday morning compact. The television occupied you, entertained you, kept you out of the kitchen for just long enough that the adults could have their first quiet cup of coffee in something close to peace. This was not a cynical arrangement. It was a loving one. Everyone got what they needed. The children got Bugs Bunny. The parents got 15 minutes at the kitchen table with their coffee and their newspaper before the household fully assembled. And those 15 minutes, quiet, unhurried, just the percolator and the radio and the early light were their own small treasure. The newspaper, due. By 1965, the Saturday paper was thick. Well, not as thick as the Sunday edition, which arrived with its magazine supplements and its full-color comics and its vast leisurely sections of opinion and travel and culture, but thick enough. The Saturday paper had its grocery store circular, which your mother had likely already looked at and clipped from, if there were coupons worth cutting, and its local news, and its sports section, and its small comics page, which was in black and white on Saturday, reserving the color printing for Sunday. Your father had his sections, and your mother had hers, and there was a quiet, uncontested division of the paper at the kitchen table that had evolved over years of Saturday mornings into something nearly ceremonial. He took the front page and the sports. She took the local section and the grocery ads. The comics, on Saturday, went to whoever got there first and had the smallest objection to sharing, which usually meant the children. Eventually, after the cartoons ended and the smell of breakfast became stronger than the gravitational pull of the television, a small argument is worth mentioning because it was always the same argument and it was never serious. Who got the comics section? In houses with more than one child, this was the Saturday morning's one recurring moment of conflict. Brief, passionate, and immediately resolved by a parent's hand, distributing the pages equally, or declaring an order by age, or by whoever had been nicer that week. And once resolved, it was forgotten immediately, because the comics were right there, and the pancakes were right there, and it was Saturday, and nothing was worth staying angry about. The light in the kitchen changed over the course of Saturday morning. Or Sade Barish. This is something you might not have noticed consciously as a child, but your body noticed it. When you first came in, perhaps at 7 or 7:30, the sun was at a low angle, coming through the kitchen window at a slant that fell across the counter and the floor, and picked out the smallest particles of dust in the air and turned them golden. The dust motes moved in the column of light, slowly and without urgency. And if you were a child and you stood in that column of light in your pajamas with your hair still pressed flat on one side from the pillow, you were briefly illuminated. By 9 o'clock, the angle had changed. The sun had climbed, and the light that came through the window was fuller and more diffuse, filling the kitchen more evenly, making everything look clean and slightly simplified the way good morning light does. By 10, if the day was clear, the kitchen was full of light, and the table caught it and held it, and the Formica surface, usually a white or a pale yellow or a speckled gray, depending on the kitchen, looked almost warm. The Formica table, you remember the exact color and pattern, don't you? It is one of those details that the memory is kept with extraordinary precision. The chrome legs, the edge trim, usually a matching chrome band. The surface smooth and cool under your forearms when you leaned on it, with its particular print, speckled or marbled, or a boomerang pattern in 2 tones, that you stared at every single morning of your childhood. These tables were nearly universal in the 1960s. American kitchen. They were practical and affordable and easy to clean. And they have never fully gone out of existence because the people who grew up eating at them have never quite stopped loving them. Maybe there was a tablecloth on Saturday. Not always, and not in every household, but in some. The Saturday morning table had a fresh tablecloth. Cotton, usually. Possibly with a pattern of cherries or a blue check or a plain white or fresh placemats, set out with a slight deliberateness that meant today was a little different from Tuesday. This was not a grand gesture. It was the smallest possible gesture. But it was made, and it registered. And it was part of what made Saturday feel like Saturday. The hot chocolate, or the Ovaltine, or the cocoa made from the Hershey's tin on the counter, stirred into warm milk with a spoon that left a small brown circle on the inside of the cup when you were done. This was the children's version of the morning coffee. The warm, sweet, slightly chocolatey drink that made you feel substantial and attended to on a cold morning, that you held in both hands the way your father held his coffee cup. A small unconscious mimicry that was, in its way, a form of love. Ovaltine was its own specific thing, different from plain cocoa. Slightly malty, slightly sweet in a different register. And it came in an oval jar, hence the name in an oval jar, which you perhaps only understood as an adult, with a lid that clicked shut satisfyingly. You mixed it into warm milk with focused attention, because getting the proportions right felt important, and the result was a drink that tasted, in the best possible way, like Saturday morning. The cereal, for those who had it, was its own ritual within the ritual. Not the same cereal as every morning, or perhaps exactly the same cereal, the one that was always in the pantry, but eaten more slowly, with greater intention. With a banana sliced on top, and the milk poured carefully from the bottle or carton, in quantities that you controlled yourself. The cereal box was on the table, propped open, and you read the back panel. You had read it before, many times. You read it again. The games, the puzzles, the proof of purchase redemption, offers for a decoder ring or a plastic toy that would arrive 6 to 8 weeks later in a cardboard envelope and be in the way of all anticipated objects. Slightly disappointing and immediately treasured. The cereal box was the Saturday morning reading material for children who could not yet manage the newspaper, and it served the purpose admirably. Here's a sound that belongs exclusively to Saturday morning and to no other time. The sound of a father's newspaper being folded back. Not put down, not set aside, but folded lengthwise to a manageable quarter of its full width. The way serious newspaper readers folded newspapers in the manner their fathers had taught them. And then the rustle as the fold was adjusted, and then a brief silence. And then, perhaps a small sound from the throat that meant something had been noticed. Some piece of news or opinion or fact that would be mentioned to no one or mentioned to the entire table, depending on the man. You probably didn't pay attention to this sound at the time. It was simply there, part of the morning's texture, as given and as unremarked as the refrigerator hum. Now, if you heard it again, that specific sequence of newspaper sounds in a quiet kitchen on a Saturday morning, you would know immediately where you were, and when you were, and when you were, and you would be, briefly, entirely back. The refrigerator hum. But it is worth its own moment because it was so constant that it registered only in its absence. The refrigerators of the 1960s were large, rounded corner machines, usually white, with a single door and a small freezer compartment at the top behind a secondary interior door. And they hummed at a particular frequency, not unpleasant, slightly below the range of active attention. That was the low note in the kitchen's ambient chord. When the compressor kicked on, the hum deepened slightly, and when it cycled off, there was a brief, startling quiet that made you aware of how constant the sound had been. Children who grew up in 1960s kitchens carry this frequency in their ears still, the way you carry the timbre of a voice you have loved, not remembered exactly but recognized immediately when you encounter. Now, the ritual, the protected, unspoken, collective Saturday morning ritual that everyone in the family observed without ever naming it. It was this. Nobody rushed anyone. That's the whole of it. That's the thing that no one planned, and no one declared, and everyone protected. Nobody said, "Hurry up." Nobody checked the clock and announced that they needed to leave in 10 minutes. Nobody asked if homework was done, or permission slips were signed, or shoes were where they should be. For the duration of Saturday morning breakfast, from the first person into the kitchen to the last cup of coffee set in the sink, the house operated under a different law, one of mutual permission, in which each person's unhurried presence was respected by every other person's unhurried presence. Your mother did not hurry you through breakfast. Your father did not fold the newspaper and stand up with that particular purposeful movement that meant the morning was over. You did not rush through your cereal in order to get back to the cartoon. Everyone was simply there. And the being there was enough, and the morning held you all inside it like a warm hand. This is not a reconstruction. It happened. In house after house, in decade after decade of Saturday mornings, it happened. Not because anyone planned it, but because Saturday gave it as a gift, and the families of the 1960s received it, and they lived inside it, and it was one of the finest things they ever had. The sausage, if it was sausage instead of bacon. The links, arranged in a skillet and rolled back and forth as they browned, taking their time. The fat rendering and the casing tightening and the smell deepening with each turn, until the surface was a mahogany brown, and the fat had pooled around them, and they were fully, completely themselves. Or the patties, which were their own thing, pressed circles of seasoned pork, slightly spiced, with a crisp outer edge and a softer interior, which could be placed on a pancake and eaten together if you were a child who had discovered that the combination of sweet and salty was one of the fundamental pleasures of being alive. Or the bacon, which requires its own catalog, the way it started limp and pale in the pan and then stiffened and curled at the edges and darkened and rendered, and the fat went translucent and then golden, and the whole strip achieved its final RM, slightly crisp at the edges and still faintly yielding in the middle, and was lifted with tongs onto a folded paper towel to drain, and the paper towel absorbed the fat in a spreading amber ring, and the bacon sat on the counter smelling extraordinary, and you asked if you could have a piece, and the answer depended entirely on whether more was coming. The orange juice. In the 1960s kitchen, orange juice was often made from frozen concentrate, the little cardboard can with the metal ends stored in the freezer, which you opened by peeling back the metal ring pull and then emptied into a glass pitcher and added the 3 cans of cold water the instructions specified, and then stirred with a long spoon until the concentrate dissolved, and the pitcher was full of something that was very close to orange juice, and was, to the 1960s palate, simply what orange juice was. If you lived in Florida, or in a place where fresh oranges were plentiful and inexpensive, you might have had the other kind, the squeezed kind, the actual juice of actual oranges, made with a glass juicer that sat on the counter, and into which you pressed half an orange and turned it. The juice running through the ridged glass center and down into the channel, and out through the spout into the glass below. This juice was different. It had pulp, and seeds if you hadn't been careful, and a bitterness at the back of the taste that the concentrate never had, and it was the superior thing, by most honest accounts. Though the concentrate was entirely adequate, and in many houses was never questioned, because it was simply what orange juice was. The toast, if there was toast. The pop of the toaster, that small mechanical explosion, the 2 slices launching upward with a finality that meant they were done, was one of the Saturday morning's quickest and most satisfying sounds. The bread was caught before it fell back in, or it was left to sit on the toast rack if there was one, and the butter was taken from the dish on the counter, not the refrigerator, because butter on the counter stayed soft enough to spread without tearing the bread, which was the difference between domestic competence and its absence, and the knife went through the soft butter and then across the hot toast, and the butter melted instantly into the surface, and the toast steamed slightly and smelled of browning and of dairy, and it was, in its unassuming way, one of the great small pleasures of the morning. From the living room, a commercial jingle, sharp and clear, a child's voice calling out over it, "Mom, can I have more cereal?" And your mother's voice from the kitchen, neither urgent nor dismissive. You just had breakfast. And the slight pause. And then, "I'm still hungry." And the negotiation was brief and usually resolved in favor of the cereal. Because on Saturday the rules about second helpings were somewhat suspended. Because on Saturday everyone was allowed a little more of what they wanted, because that was Saturday's implicit promise. The radio, Dottie, across the kitchen from the stove, on the counter, or mounted under a cabinet in those houses where the installation had been done. A small AM radio with a round dial and a gold or silver grill. Its tuning set to wherever it had always been set. The station that your family listened to on Saturday morning, which in the early part of the decade was likely a local station carrying farm reports or regional news in the early morning, transitioning to local talk, or perhaps light music as the hour progressed. By mid-morning on a Saturday in the mid-1960s, many stations had shifted to their weekend pop music programming, top 40 or country if you were in the South or the Midwest, or the easy listening format that occupied the safe middle ground, and the radio provided a continuous, undemanding background that was distinct from the television's sound and completely compatible with conversation, or the absence of it. Do you remember the exact moment the house woke up? When the first person turned on the radio and the kitchen filled with that soft, familiar voice? Because that voice, whatever it was, whoever it was, whatever station your family kept on those mornings, was part of the morning's total sound in a way that cannot be fully separated from the other sound. The radio was on when you came in. It had perhaps been on since before you woke. The voice on the radio spoke of weather and local events, and the small news of a world that was, on Saturday morning, kept at a gentle distance, its urgencies muffled, its demands deferred. You didn't need to know what was happening in the world. You were in the kitchen. Saturday had suspended all of that. The scrambled eggs, if eggs were part of the morning. Not the quick weekday scramble, cracked hastily into a hot pan and pushed around with a fork until something egg-shaped emerged, edible but unremarkable. These were Saturday scrambled eggs, which meant the heat was lower and the patience was longer, and possibly there was cheese, a handful of shredded cheddar or a few slices of Velveeta, torn and dropped in at the end. When the eggs were almost but not quite set, the cheese melting in ribbons through the soft yellow folds. These eggs took their time. They came out soft and pillowy and not quite fully solid, holding their moisture. And they went onto the plate beside the bacon and beside the toast, and the morning was, for a moment, simply this: a plate of food made by someone who loved you, on a morning when no one had to be anywhere. It wasn't a special occasion. That's what made it so special. The jam, the peanut butter, the particular glass jar, slightly sticky at the neck, that sat on the table or came out of the cabinet, and whose label was part of the morning's visual landscape. Welch's grape jelly in the purple label jar that doubled as a glass once it was empty, or Smucker's strawberry, or the homemade preserves that a neighbor or a grandmother had put up in the summer and given in a mason jar sealed with a paraffin disc. And when you opened it, the smell of the original fruit was still there, concentrated and slightly fermented, and domestic in the most absolute sense of the word. The jam went onto the toast, or onto the pancakes, as an alternative to syrup. And if it went onto the pancakes, it was with the butter. And the combination of bread, fat, fruit, sweet was something that has not been improved upon in any era of culinary history. The French toast, a specific mention because it deserves. 1. In the households where it appeared, and it appeared in many, it was often the mother's specialty, or the father's, the one breakfast item that required a kind of attention. The other items did not. The bread was thick-cut, white, or if you were in a house that kept richer provisions, a brioche or a challah or a Texas toast that had no business being humble. The egg mixture was eggs and milk, and a pinch of cinnamon, and possibly a few drops of vanilla. And the bread was laid in and soaked. Not quickly, but truly soaked, so that the egg penetrated the bread to its center, and then it was lifted and laid in a buttered pan that was hot enough to set the outside immediately, and the French toast browned and swelled and became, in the pan, something that was not quite bread and not quite egg, but a third thing, its own category, its own argument for getting out of bed on Saturday morning. Powdered sugar, sometimes sifted over the top through a small strainer. Maple syrup. A few strawberries, if it was summer and they were in the refrigerator. A glass of cold milk beside the plate. This is a complete sentence of pleasure. The pile of Saturday newspapers. Once your father had moved through his sections, the paper was available to anyone. Your mother took the grocery circular, folding it in half and setting it near her coffee cup to consult later when she made the list. Her pencil, the same pencil that lived in the kitchen drawer, always slightly stubby, always slightly in need of sharpening, moving down the columns of advertised prices, circling or noting what was worth the comparison. The list took shape on the back of an envelope or on a small notepad kept near the telephone, and the making of it was a small Saturday morning creative act, a planning of the week's meals in the form of a list of ingredients, conducted over coffee and the remains of breakfast at a table that still held the morning's warmth. Wow. The comics section. Black and white on Saturday is mentioned, but still worth a prolonged reading. Peanuts, Charlie Brown and Snoopy, and the whole endlessly varied repertoire of small dignities and small defeats that made Charles Schulz's strip the most human thing in the Saturday paper. Blondie and Dagwood, whose domestic comedies were recognizable to everyone and belonged to no particular decade. Their kitchen and their Bumstead household a kind of universal American house that existed everywhere and nowhere. Dick Tracy, which was earnestly, almost militantly serious, its square-jawed hero pursuing square-jawed villainy with a dedication that children found thrilling and adults found slightly comic. Dennis the Menace, who was doing in the comics the same things the children at the table were theoretically capable of doing, which gave the strip a documentary quality for everyone involved. A child lay on the living room floor with the comics section, having brought it in from the table. On their stomach, bare feet in the air, a slight swinging of the feet as they read. The occasional sound from the cartoon still going on the television. The smell of the kitchen following them into the living room and sitting with them comfortably. The house was fully awake now. The morning was in its warmth. The quiet, though, under all of this, under the cartoons and the radio and the newspaper and the breakfast sounds, there was a quiet that was different from the quiet of other days. The quiet of a Monday morning is anxious. The quiet of a sick day is heavy. The quiet of a summer afternoon is sleepy. The quiet of a Saturday morning kitchen is something else. It is a quiet of sufficiency. It is the quiet of a space that contains everything it needs and requires nothing from outside itself. It is the sound of time that is entirely your own. No one told you this was your childhood. It just was. Your father, at some point, folded the newspaper. Not put it down, folded it carefully, back into some approximation of its original form. The sections nested, the whole thing manageable again, and set it on the far corner of the table where it would sit for the rest of the day, available to anyone who wanted it. He poured the last of the coffee from the percolator into his cup, and the coffee that comes out last is always the strongest, slightly bitter. The grounds having given everything they have, and he drank it without complaint because he was a man who finished his coffee. Then he sat for a moment, just sitting, looking out the kitchen window at the backyard. The maple tree, or the elm, or the oak, or the modest patch of lawn with the garden hose still coiled where it had been left Thursday. He was thinking about something. Or he was thinking about nothing. You didn't know which then, and you don't know now, but the image of him sitting there, in his weekend clothes, the coffee cup in his hand, looking out at the backyard in the Saturday morning light, is one of the pieces of your childhood that has survived perfectly intact. The slow, quiet pleasure of an adult, sitting alone for a few minutes after breakfast, just staring out the window. Maybe it was your father. Maybe it was your mother, who finally sat down after the plates were cleared and the skillet was soaking, and the morning was winding toward mid-morning errands. She sat with the last of her coffee, which was now lukewarm, because she had been tending everyone else through the meal, and her own cup had been forgotten 3 times and rewarmed twice. And she sat with it now in both hands, and she looked at her kitchen, her table, her window, her family scattered through the rooms of the house, with an expression that you, as a child, could not have named. It was not happiness exactly. It was deeper than happiness. It was something like recognition, like being exactly where you were supposed to be. The Saturday grocery list was almost finished. She had the circular and the notepad and the pencil and the remains of the week's inventory in her head, and the list would be done before the morning was over. And then there would be the question of whether the whole family went to the store or whether she went alone. And in many houses, the whole family went because Saturday morning grocery shopping was a family event, another Saturday ritual, and the children were allowed to put one small thing in the cart that wasn't on the list. One thing. The negotiation of what that one thing would be was conducted in the cereal aisle, or the bakery section, or the candy aisle, at the end, and it was never prolonged, and it was always decisive, and the chosen item was carried by the child who chose it all the way to the checkout. And that child felt, for the duration of that trip, like a person of consequence. But not yet. That was later. Well, the morning was still here. Later there might be errands, the hardware store, if something in the house needed a part or a tool, the library, which in the 1960s was open on Saturday mornings and was attended by children who had returned their books and were ready for the next set, who moved through the children's section with a proprietary familiarity, and who checked out their maximum allotment every single time without fail. The park, if the weather was good and the afternoon stretched invitingly. The car wash, which in 1965 meant a bucket and a hose in the driveway, and a father in old clothes and children who started out helping and ended up simply getting wet, which was fine, which was actually the best possible outcome. But all of that was later. Right now, it was Saturday morning. Right now the cartoons were still going. A distant tinny fanfare from the living room, the theme of something heroic, resolved and repeated. The radio was playing something familiar. The kitchen smelled of coffee and syrup and the good specific warmth of a morning in which everyone who should be here was here. The pajamas. This is worth a separate moment because the pajamas were central, not as clothing, but as a state of being. To still be in your pajamas at 9 in the morning was, on any other morning, evidence of illness or disorder. On Saturday, it was simply correct. The cotton, or the flannel, the rumpled condition from a full night of sleep, the particular comfort of being dressed for warmth rather than appearance. The pajamas said, "You are not required to present yourself to anyone." They said, "The world outside can wait." They said, "You are home, and home is allowed to be this comfortable, this honest about what a body actually needs." Flannel pajamas on a cold Saturday. The kitchen floor, cool, on bare feet. The smell of bacon still in the air. The percolator silent now. Its work done. The newspaper distributed to its various readers. The cartoons in the next room. Bugs Bunny maintaining his perfect, unreachable composure against the world's constant absurdity. Your mother's voice, asking no one in particular whether anyone wanted the last pancake. The sound of a chair scraping and a small voice saying yes. The sound of the syrup bottle being unstuck from the last ring of syrup on the table and tilted over a plate. These things happened. They happened in your house, in some version, some Saturday, some year between 1960 and 1969. And the fact that they happened is not small. The fact that they happened, and that you were there, and that some part of your body still carries the precise sensory memory of them. The temperature of the floor, the weight of the cup, the sound of the cartoon is not small. When did Saturday morning stop feeling like this? And was it gradual? Or did we just wake up one day and realize they had gone? There is no clean answer. Saturday mornings change the way all good things change. Slowly, and then all at once. And then you realize the change had been happening for years before you noticed it. The children got older and stayed in bed later, and the cartoons they watched were different, and then there were no cartoons in the morning at all, or they watched them on a different screen in a different room. The percolator was replaced by a drip machine, and then perhaps by something else. And the sound of the morning changed with each replacement. The Formica table gave way to another table, or the family moved, or the house was sold, and the specific table of your childhood went somewhere and became someone else's specific table, carrying its pattern of boomerangs or speckles or pale yellow marble into another kitchen, another family's mornings. The newspaper thinned over the years. The paper grocery circular became a website. The comics section shrank to a column, and then to less. And the strips you loved were discontinued, or continued without their original authors, and were something else. Something adjacent, but not the same. The Saturday morning, cartoons that had been for 20 years the defining soundtrack of the American child's weekend, were gone from network television by the 1990s, replaced by educational programming, mandated by federal regulation and watched by nobody. These changes were made for reasons, and some of them were good reasons. And the world that replaced the one you grew up in has its own genuine pleasures and its own genuine goods. This is not a complaint about the present. This is a recognition of the past. A clear-eyed, grateful recognition of the specific mornings that lived inside the space of one decade, and one kind of household, and one kind of unhurried American Saturday. And of what they gave to the people who lived inside them. They gave you the feeling of being cared for, without being attended to. They gave you the experience of time that belonged to you. Really belonged to you, not borrowed from someone else's schedule, not subdivided into activities and appointments, but genuinely, freely yours. They gave you the particular intelligence of boredom, the slow, creative boredom that comes from a morning with no plan, in which a child's mind, left to its own devices, finds things to do that could not have been found otherwise. They gave you the sound of a family being together without performing togetherness. They gave you the smell of coffee and bacon and maple syrup as the smell of safety, of sufficiency, of love expressed in the language of food on a Saturday morning. The last anchor. Here, at the end of the morning, before the errands and the afternoon and the rest of the week begin to assert themselves, the newspaper. Not the news in it. That will keep, or won't, and it makes very little difference. But the weight of it, the specific physical weight of a Saturday paper in the hand, its sections held together by the fold, slightly ink-smelling. The paper a very specific texture between your fingers, not silky and not rough, but exactly itself. And the way it sits on the table after everyone has been through it, disordered and comfortable, lived in comfortable. The way a table looks after a real meal has been eaten at it. Your father folds it one last time. Your mother rises and takes the cups to the sink. The cartoon in the next room resolves in the chase's final reversal, the familiar triumph of wit over force. Someone asks, with genuine interest but no urgency, what the plan is for the afternoon. The answer takes a moment to come. The sun is full in the kitchen window now. The percolator is cool. The syrup bottle is back on its shelf, and the pancakes are gone. And the morning is not gone yet, but it is moving gently toward the afternoon. You are still in your pajamas. You are 7 years old. The whole weekend is ahead of you. You can still smell it. You can still hear the radio. You can still see your mother's hands. And you would give anything, just once more, just one more Saturday morning, to sit at that table, in those pajamas, with nowhere to be, in the warm and unrepeatable light of a morning that was ordinary and extraordinary and entirely yours.